But today, I want to make a tie-in for you between one concept and another batch of concepts that we've been talking about. So look over here first. You should be familiar with some of these ideas. As you see up here, if you can see my little drawing here, this is Freytag's pyramid, right? And we've been talking about Freytag's pyramid. And if you want to pause the video and ask yourself, wait, what were the parts of Freytag's pyramid? Pause this video now and see if you can remember and explain what those parts are. Now, I hope that you came up with exposition. I hope you came up with rising action, climax, falling action, or what we've also called the denouement, right? Which is that fancy Greek term that means something like unraveling. And we talked about using Avengers Endgame as an example to illustrate the denouement. After the Avengers have defeated Thanos and Iron Man snaps his finger because his suit took on all the Infinity Stones, Iron Man sacrificed his life to restore half of the life of the universe. And then the denouement is we get to the funeral of Iron Man. And that's a little bit of the unraveling, right? As sad and tragic as it is. But of course, he was a hero. So I hope you remember Freytag's pyramid. Now, remember context. Context, okay? What are your goals this unit? Well, you have two, basically, right? The first goal is to write a narrative. You're tasked with writing me a short story. A short story, because we don't have time for long works, right? So you're tasked with writing me a short story. Now, we've talked about how you can apply Freytag's pyramid into your plotting process of your own short story. You can apply Freytag's pyramid within the writing process of your own story. You can use it as sort of an outline, right? Because maybe the rising action is something that you're really invested in, and you want the suspense and the tension to really build, and you want the character's conflict to really become something special. So you really want to focus in on that Freytag's pyramid, the rising action part in your plotting, which it works to a climax. Okay, now to get to the other idea here, this was my sort of mathematical take on plot. It's different than Freytag's pyramid. We remember that we have the y and the x-axis that you can see here, and we called the y-axis the axis of fortune or success and failure, and we called the x-axis the x-axis of time, right? And if you recall, we used the y-axis to plot the beginnings of our character, which I hope you guys see obviously can connect with Freytag's pyramid. Where do we want our character to begin? Where do we want our character to begin? Do we want our character to begin in a successful position in life? Is our character a beautiful, intelligent, well-beloved queen of a wonderful kingdom and everything's going right? Or is our character a rogue and someone that's just made someone who's made bad decisions just over and over again, right? Well, in the case of our queen, if we want to tell an interesting story, then over time, we want her success and failure to be a wave, right? And maybe we want the end of the story is that she regains her kingdom, or she defeats the antagonism of evil and saves the world, or wherever it might be. And so she ends in a place where everything's fine. Or perhaps we want it to be more of a tragedy, right? And as beautiful and intelligent and beloved as she is, maybe she dies at the end and the kingdom is lost. Whew, that could be a tragedy, right? But if we start down here on failure, well, maybe we have our character end in a high station in life. They've overcome their emotional hang-ups. They've overcome the familial problems. They've defeated the big baddie, the last boss, right, in the final stage of their story, to draw on video game lingo, okay? So maybe they end up high. Or maybe it's all a farce and it's something like this, right? We think they're going to go up, but then things just go right back down and they regress back, they de-evolve back into their low moral character. So remember, we've talked about these ideas and we've been talking about plot and structure of stories, and we've been thinking about how to begin a story, how to develop a story, and how to end a story in a way that would be familiar to an audience. Not because these ideas are trying to box you in. No, we're not trying to box you in, but it's like little rules to help. And remember my analogy with guitar. When I teach my students guitar, of course, I have to start with the basics. I gotta teach them octaves. I gotta teach them scales, and I gotta teach them the notes and the names of the strings. And these things are fundamental, and they've been constant through time. The names of the strings haven't changed. What makes a major scale versus a minor scale hasn't changed. So these things are constant. They're not variable. So I have to give the students the basics. But it's not because that's gonna box their creativity in. It's that's what's gonna help their creativity flourish, right? I want the creativity to flourish, okay? So think about these ideas like that. Oh, and before we move on to our new concept for the day, which is characterization, just real quick refresher on the MICE quotient or the MICE formula. We can take one piece of the acronym as a refresher. Remember, the MICE quotient is all about different types of plot lines. And of course, it's going to connect to these different plotting devices, because the MICE quotient, if you recall, helps you think not only what kind of a story is, but also how to begin, how to develop, and how to end a story, which is exactly what we've been talking about with these ideas. So remember, take the idea of character, for example, which will be a nice segue into characterization. If you're telling a character story, according to the MICE quotient, then you want a character to begin in a place where they're just not satisfied with their life, right? So moving back to my Y and X axis idea, maybe they're down here, right? They're kind of failing a little bit, whether emotionally or socially or physically or maybe professionally, whatever their station, whatever they do in life, they're not satisfied, right? But over the course of events, right? As time moves from a beginning through a middle and to an end, they experience a transformation. And oftentimes this is going to be a transformation for the good, a transformation for the best, okay? So they might end up way up here. And I'm sure you guys could think of a lot of examples. If you want to pause the video real quick and refresh yourself on what I've just said. What is this Y and X axis idea all about? Can you explain it to yourself? Can you refresh yourself on Freytag's pyramid? And can you explain the MICE quotient to you? That would be a good thing for you to do real quick. And then B, can you think of any stories that are examples of a story where a character has to undergo an intense transformation? So pause the video real quick and see if you can't think those out before we move on. All right, well, if you paused the video and you came up with an example, I hope the example was clear that your character starts in one state of being, to speak all philosophical, and then moves to a new state of being and undergoes a sort of cocoon-like transformation where they wrap themselves in a cocoon, and then towards the end, they're a beautiful butterfly. Maybe that's not the metaphor you're looking for, but I hope you get the idea, right? And remember, all the resources that discuss these ideas are on It's Learning. So as you're thinking about your narrative and you're trying to plot out your story and you're going through that creative process, which is going to be unique for everyone, go back into the sources and remind yourself, wait, how could I use milieu and character together? Because we've talked about how all these plot lines can be interwoven into a single narrative flow. So go back to the sources and educate yourself, or message me, or come talk to me, and I can help you think through where you are with your story. Now, let's make a quick segue real quick. And I want to now talk about a new concept. And I know it's not new for you, all right? I know it's not new for you totally, because you've heard of this word, characterization, okay? Characterization is basically how an author shows you a character. So again, the definition of characterization that I'm using is it's how an author shows you their character. And there's basically two fundamental ways of characterizing, two kinds of characterization. And now we're going to get into the meat of this new lesson, all right? I've written DC versus IC. And no, that's not DC as in, the comic books. DC stands for direct characterization. Direct characterization. And IC stands for indirect characterization. Direct versus indirect characterization. Now, let me back up just a little bit. You see these 4 things here. I feel like a weatherman, right? In today's forecast, we have action. Now, you should see action, thoughts and introspection, dialogue conversation, narrator description. Okay? And remember, we're really speaking about stories that are written. It's very fruitful to think about stories in the movie theaters, to think about movies and TV shows and plays because they're kind of concrete and we see what's going on. But I just want to keep you in touch with the fact that we really are focusing on written narratives here. Okay? So look, these 4 things are the 4 fundamental methods, the 4 fundamental ways that you can show a character. Okay? The 4 ways that you can get your character across to your readers. All right? So let's look at direct characterization and how it fits within these 4 ways. Direct characterization is just when the narrator in the text tells you a bunch of things about the story. All right? The narrator just tells you a bunch of things about the story, about the character. Again, direct characterization is when the narrator just describes the character for you, describes the environment, but doesn't show you the character doing any action, doesn't show you the character thinking, doesn't show you the character in conversation with other characters. The narrator just tells you about things. All right? It's the difference between me telling you that my character in my story is popular and me showing you their popularity by them walking into school and all the kids going, "Yo, Patrick, what's up?" And the pretty cheerleaders might be like, "Oh my gosh, Patrick, what are you doing this week?" Right? And even the teachers are like, "Hey, Patrick, like, how was your weekend?" Right? That would show you my character's popularity instead of me just telling you that he was popular or he is popular. Okay? So, direct characterization relies solely upon narrator description. Again, direct characterization relies solely upon narrator description. Now, this is what's going to be cool about this, is that you guys, I've given you a link to this document right here, and this is an example of my own writing. Now, if you look at on the planner and It's Learning, you will see this little document. And what I've done, if you want to pull it up now, real quick, pull it up and pause the video and pull it up. You should see that there is a direct example and an indirect example, right? Direct example and indirect example. My direct example is me just directly describing to you a character that I thought about, okay? I give you a few traits of his. I say, he never liked going into the bathroom. Patrick was ugly. His style was bad. His mom was sweet, and I name a few more. These are just narrator descriptions directly characterizing the character. It doesn't show you anything, it just tells. Now, you should see in bold an indirect example there, right? Now, when you read that, what I hope you see is that I am trying to show you the things that I've told you directly. For example, I say that Patrick was ugly, and that was just flat out, I directly told you, the narrator describes it. Well, in my indirect example, I'm going to show you how Patrick was ugly, which is, I try to be funny about it. And another example is that going to school is difficult for him. In my direct example, I just say that flat out. But in my indirect example, I want to show you how going to school was difficult for him. I want to show you that going to school was difficult for that character. So let's move on to indirect characterization real quick. And I know the lesson's getting a little long, but I'll be able to wrap it up shortly.
So we've talked about direct characterization and how it relies solely on narrator description. And if you see my example on the characterization document on It's Learning, you will see under the direct example a bunch of bland descriptions of a character. Now, indirect characterization, in terms of these four ways, these four elements, is going to use them all. Indirect characterization is going to show you character through the actions that they do, through the thoughts that they have, through the dialogue and conversation that they have with others, and through the descriptions of the narrator. So indirect characterization uses all these ways to get your character across, and it's much more engaging, both emotionally and intellectually for the reader. Because the reader is able to think about your character based upon what they see, instead of just being told a bunch of things flat out that isn't really imaginative, right? So a little tip, while you're writing your narrative, you want to try to indirectly characterize, okay? But like I said, the lesson's getting a little long, so let me try to wrap this up a little bit for you, okay? So going back to my example, my characterization document, you will see me directly characterizing the character at the top in the first example. I want you to read through the indirect example and see if you can tell how I'm characterizing him using action, thoughts, dialogue, and narrator description. There's thoughts that the character has, there's conversation that the character has, there's actions that the character does, and there's some descriptions that the narrator gives of the character and his environment. And so I want you to think about how I'm using these ways to show you my character instead of merely just using narrator description to directly characterize them. All right? So hopefully you can pick that out. And I would love for you to message me with your insights about how I went about it, because it's really what I want you to reflect in your own narrative. I want you to apply these principles of indirect characterization in your own narrative, okay? Now, I'm going to have to make another video that touches base upon this idea again, one that's maybe a bit more practical and one that will urge you into application. But before I finish this sort of lecture-y video, a quick connection to our previous ideas of plot and structure. Because remember, you guys, and I stress this all the time, education, one element of a good education is seeing how ideas tie into each other, how ideas can connect relevantly and logically, right? And with any field that you go into, your field is going to be just chock full of ideas. Sciences, the humanities, the business world. There's going to be ideas everywhere. And the really focused mind is able to take those ideas and see if they can coalesce into something greater than the individual parts. So I want you to pause the video, and given everything that I've said about characterization, how to show character through thoughts and action and dialogue and through description, and how the concept of characterization works, I want you to ask yourself, well, how exactly does that tie in with plotting a narrative? What's the connection between characterization and plot? All right? And try to think of an example to help you. Think about your favorite story, right? If you took the character out, where would the plot be? How much more engaging is a good plot if the characters are shown doing exciting things or having interesting thoughts and conversations? So pause the video and ask yourself, man, what is the relationship between good characterization and good plots? Okay. If you pause the video and you came up with an idea, see if maybe your idea vibes with mine. And I'm just going to put it in simple terms, all right? Obviously, and here's the connection. If you're going to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you want it a little bit of a roller coaster, a bit of an emotional wave, it's not just this bland robot walking, monotone through the world,
then you want to tell a story that has interesting characters. And if your characters are interesting, you want to show how they're interesting, right? And if you have a character story, thinking about the mice quotient, that's going to undergo in a really intense change. If you have a character using the mice quotient, a character story, and this protagonist is going to undergo a really interesting, important change, then don't you want to show that change? Don't you want to show that change through the actions they take? Through the new actions they have to take given the story? Through the thoughts that they have and how their thoughts are changing? Through the dialogue and conversation they have with other characters and the new characters that are introduced? Don't you want to show how your character changes instead of just flat out saying that they change? I hope that you feel like you want to show your characters changing, right? Because great writers want you to see this and to think about it yourself, right? So again, thinking about your story, plotting it from beginning, middle to end, and using some of these other ideas in your plotting, know that your writing is going to be 100 times better if you can show your characters, right? If you can show them with actions and thoughts and dialogue and do a little narrator description along the way, all right? Now, there's obviously a lot more that we could say about this, and there's a lot of application of these ideas and practice with these ideas that we could go through. But this, I hope, gave you a gist of, again, a refresher on plot and structure, a solid gist on the concept of characterization and the difference between direct characterization and indirect characterization and the 4 fundamental ways to get your character across. And I hope you can see at least a loose connection between these, if not a tight connection. And I hope you can think about using these concepts in your own writing. All right? Now, if you have any questions for me, just message me on It's Learning or come to me and we can sort through your problems. I would love to hear how you are trying to apply these ideas in your writing. All right, guys, Mr. Eaton out. Until next time.